Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to the Arturia Farfisa-V tutorial series. What you're looking at here is the Farfisa Compact Deluxe, released in 1968, one of a line of products produced by Farfisa throughout the 1960s. The Compact series was originally introduced in 1964, intended to be a competitor to the Vox Continental that had been introduced in 1962. The Farfisa range through the 60s and 70s were very popular, used by musicians such as Richard Wright from Pink Floyd, Mike Oldfield, Jean-Michel Jarre, John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, and it had quite a few things going for it. Firstly, it was cheaper than the Vox and the Hammond, so many musicians would buy this simply because they couldn't afford the significantly more expensive alternatives, but it also sounded wonderful, and it sounded a lot more like a synthesizer. Synthesizers were just starting to appear around about this time than its direct competitors. Dialed up a preset here called Controls of the Sun, which emulates a sound from Pink Floyd's 1968 album, Saucer Full of Secrets, and we've got this kind of broken, there's obviously effects on here as well, but the fundamental organ sound itself, which I have to take all the effects off, raspy, harmonic, rich, really interesting tone. I'm going to break down how this thing works over a couple of episodes. Today I'm going to show you the primary interface, and in the second episode we'll have a look under the hood at the advanced screen and see what some of this stuff does. Hope you enjoy this series, and if you do, please check out my Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to help support my channel. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to throw that fancy sound away and get us back to a default template sound. This is going to sound much more simple. So there's no effects applied to that sound, that's the organ all on its own. So the Compact series, as you can see, it's a single keyboard, but it's actually a double manual keyboard. What that basically means is the word manual is a strange organist's term to describe something that's played with the hands, as opposed to pedals, which are played with the feet. It's literally as simple as that. So if you see the word manual anywhere, and here you can see it's printed on the front, it just means keyboard. Now on the Compact Deluxe, we have a single keyboard that can be divided into a bass manual and a treble manual. One of the other instruments in the Compact line, the Compact Duo, actually had two physical keyboards. That's not the case here, so we're going to need to manage that separation between the bass and the treble. I'll show you how to do that today. But to start with, let's just figure out how this thing makes sound. What you're hearing here is the treble manual. So the bass manual is not currently engaged. We have a bass manual switch on the left-hand side, and it's currently set to off. So you're only hearing the treble sounds. All of the buttons on the right-hand side of the keyboard, all of the green buttons here that I'm circling with my mouse, and the white buttons to the right, are all concerned with generating tone from the treble manual. So these are treble manual controls. The primary sound comes from the treble buttons, which are the white ones. Ignore the funny red one at the end. It's very marginal. We don't need to worry about it just for now. So these white buttons are your treble manual controls. But if you're in a performance situation and you want to change to a different treble sound very quickly, you can press the Multitone boost button, this green button on the right-hand side, and that will engage this secondary set of treble controls. So now the green buttons will determine the tone and all of the white buttons will be disabled. So these are basically two preset banks, and they're fundamentally controlled by this empty boost button. And because the boost button's currently set to off, we're only hearing sounds from the white buttons. Now I'm saying the word button, it's not actually correct. Strictly speaking, they're called tabs. These switchable toggle switches on organs are normally called tabs. Let's turn all the tabs off and press a key. And unsurprisingly, we get no sound. We have to instruct the organ what kind of tone we want. So let's press the leftmost one. It's called bass 16. And we're going to get a tone of a particular pitch. Have a look at the tuner. So that's the note C at 130 Hertz. If I turn bass 16 off and switch to one of the 8 tabs instead, let's try flute 8. I'm going to press the same key on the keyboard. Now if you look in the tuner, we're generating a pitch 1 octave higher. But in addition to jumping up an octave, we've also got a slightly different tone. We've gone from a bass tone to a flute tone. Now the bass and flute sounds in this organ are related. They're both called round tones. All of the other names that you see on these tabs are all the sharp tones. So if we switch from a flute, which is a round tone, to an oboe, it's a much sharper, much brighter sound, far more high harmonics. Have a look in the spectrum analyzer below. There's a lot more going on in the high frequency range than with the flute, which is much softer. these frequencies are sculpted away much more radically. So the trumpet and the strings are also sharp tones. If we switch from strings 8 to strings 4, we're going to get fundamentally the same tonal sound, but we're going to jump up an octave. You can think of it in terms of combined presets, if you like. So if we can choose both pitch and tone from the words and the numbers on the tabs that we select, then we can do a little bit of experimentation and get a better idea of how this thing's working. I'm going to turn on flute at 8, sounds like that, and also strings 4. So I've now chosen two separate pitches that the organ's going to generate simultaneously. Both of those sounds are going to sound simultaneously. Now the tuner is identifying the fundamental, sticks at 261, but actually the strings 4 is contributing a note 1 octave higher at 520. Just that the fundamental, the lowest tone in a sound, pretty much always dominates. So that's the thing that's going to be registered in the tuner. But you're also getting the combination of those two tonal effects, the softness from the flute and the sharpness from the strings. If we invert those two switches, so we switch to strings 8 and flute 4, you're going to get a very similar sound. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of what these buttons are doing. They're really combinations of two effects being applied simultaneously. And obviously we can bring in as many of these tabs as we want. And the tone becomes increasingly complex as more and more filter circuits, more and more harmonics are being introduced into the circuit. Let's turn most of them off and switch back to just strings 4. So I'm generating a tone at 520 Hz. Now I'm going to press the 2 2/3 button. Now that's generating a fifth chord. We have the original tone, 520, but there's a brand new tone being introduced at 783 Hz, which is basically a perfect fifth. It's 7 semitones above. You can see in the tuner, it's playing a G, the note that I'm actually playing, which is a C. On an instrument such as the Hammond B3, non-octave intervals are really important. Many of they're called drawbars on a B3, but you pull out drawbars to introduce non-octave based overtones. On the Farfisa, we only have one of them accessible, and it's the perfect fifth. I've set just the 2 2/3 tab on its own, and now I'll introduce the Brilliance tab. Tone gets brighter, so the Brilliance control adds additional brightness to just the 2 2/3 tab. It doesn't have any impact on any of the others. So that's our primary treble manual control. By turning on various of these tabs, we control the fundamental tone of the treble manual with greatest amount of flexibility. So now let's have a look at the multitone controls, these green tabs. The moment I press MT Boost on, if I turn all of the other green tabs off, you're going to hear no sound. So the white treble controls have been disabled. These are no longer having any impact on the organ at all. We have a secondary set of tonal controls. Let's turn one of them on. This is the 16 tab. So I'm still playing on the treble manual. This is fundamentally a treble tone, but it's now no longer got anything to do with the white switches. We have our separate controls. So is there an equivalence between the 16 foot on the multi-tone buttons and any of the tabs on the treble controls? I've turned all of the white tabs off, and I'll turn just the bass 16 tab on. So the 16 tab is bass 16, but it's not labelled because you can't do anything about it. You've only got one option. Switch to 8. That's 8 flute. The 4 foot. It's the 4 foot flute. And the 2 2/3 is the same tab as the 2 2/3 on the treble control. Again, we don't have any definition of the tonal control here. This is simply a single switch. But the multi-tone boost section has a secret weapon. Let me turn a couple of these tabs on. So we've got the 16 and the 4 set here. Now underneath the organ, see this lever? Look down in the bottom left-hand corner. It says knee lever. Now I think it's pretty obvious what you were supposed to do with this control. You were supposed to operate it with your knee. So if I press a key, changing tonal characteristics of the sound, I'm basically clicking on this thing and dragging it with the mouse. The tone gets brighter and brighter as I move it to the right. Also note, as soon as I let go of it, now it flips back, just like a pitch bend control, it flips back to center. So this function is unique to the green keys. You don't have access to the knee lever from your primary white treble controls. If you press the all boost on button, it basically virtually sets this knee lever to 100%. So that sound is the same as that sound. So these two buttons are fundamentally different, all boost and empty boost. Empty boost is your on-off switch for the green controls. All boost is your set knee lever to 100%, set brightness to 100% on the MT boost section. Let's turn everything on and turn it down a bit because it's a bit too loud. Beautiful tone, absolutely lovely. So that's the treble manual. Now we have a bass manual. Let's engage bass manual, turn bass on. And we got two lights engage. What this is basically telling you is this is the range of the keyboard over which the bass manual is currently operating. Now my setup's backlit here. I can't actually see this black key going down. If I press one of the sharp keys, hopefully you can see this black key going down, but I'm currently engaging the bass manual. If I turn bass off, I've jumped back to my treble manual, and that's just going to be playing the 2 2/3. So when I press a physical F on the keyboard, I'm playing a C, which is 7 semitones higher. Let's go back into bass mode, and I'm going to press gang the grey keys into bass manual service. So these grey keys can basically be assigned to either the bass manual or the treble manual. By default, they're in the camp of the treble manual, but if I press the grey keys select button, now this red light switches to tell you the range of keyboard that's currently operating the bass manual. And so if I press an F 1 octave higher, there, that's the bass manual you're hearing. Turn the bass manual off. Just in the same way that we could introduce brightness into the treble manual via the use of the boost button or the knee lever, the bass manual has a similar kind of thing. We can introduce sharpness into the bass manual. So there's my standard tone. There's a much brighter tone. Or we can introduce a percussive attack. If you have a look in the oscilloscope when I press a key, absolutely stable. When I engage percussion, it starts loud and then very quickly decays. The speed of that decay is controlled by our long short button. So at the moment we have a long decay. If I switch to short mode, the initial attack is much shorter and it snaps down. As opposed to a more gentle decay. It's still fast. The speed of decay for this bass manual, the long and short buttons are fixed. You get either one or the other or none, in which case we have a stable tone. So if I start playing up the keyboard now, these are all bass tones. The next note I press switches over to the treble manual, and there is the crossover. Finally, we have independent volume control for the bass manual. It's currently set to 0 dB, but if I press a bass note, I can now mix the volume of the bass manual with the treble manual if I want it a little bit quieter. There we go. Okay, so those are the primary tonal characteristics of the organ. Let's turn the bass manual back off again and switch back to exclusively treble mode. So now the entire keyboard is in treble mode. Even the lowest notes are all playing on the treble manual. Let's introduce some tremolo. We'll turn tremolo on, hold a note down, barely noticeable at 0.15 Hertz because it's cycling so slowly, it's not really noticeable. But when I start turning the speed of the tremolo up, you can actually see in the oscilloscope the signal going up and down. That's what tremolo is. It's just a periodic increase and decrease of amplitude. And we can sync it to the host tempo as well by engaging sync mode. And now all of these will be fractions of whatever the host tempo happens to be. Now let's engage vibrato, which is a very similar kind of concept to tremolo, but instead of periodically increasing and decreasing the amplitude, we're going to increase and decrease the pitch. And we have two speeds, slow and fast. And finally, we have reverb. Now at the moment, reverb is fixed, it's either on or off. In the next episode, when we have a look at the advanced features, you'll see that we've got some greater flexibility over the control of the reverb sound, but just for now, it's either on or off. Finally, let's have a look at the section in the center called Repeat Percussion. These buttons are somewhat interrelated, so we'll start off on the left-hand side by engaging this section of controls. We're going to press on. Let's press a key and see what happens. Okay, so now I'm pressing a single note, but obviously we have multiple attacks. That note is being played repeatedly. That's because we're currently in repeat mode, and we can control the speed of that repeat with our rate knob. If we toggle this tab into percussion mode instead, we're no longer going to repeat, but we have a percussion effect in the same way that we did on the bass manual. Remember when we had the loud notes and then it very quickly decayed? That's what we've got on the treble manual as well, but this time we have a three-way control, fast, medium and slow, which allows us to determine how quickly the percussion sound decays. So here's slow, medium and fast. So as you can see by these little black lines, the repeat control only has anything to do when the tab is in repeat mode, and the percussion knob only has anything to do when the tab's in percussion mode. Okay, so we've had a look at the primary controls in the organ. In episode 2, we'll have a look at what's going on underneath the organ, and we'll also have a bit of a wander around this advanced screen. Tons of cool stuff to see in there. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.